You are listening to episode 161 of the Peaceful Mind Podcast.
Welcome to the Peaceful Mind Podcast, a place for creating the peace of mind you need to be the best mom you are created by God to be. If you want to bring more balance, more joy, and more peace to your motherhood, this is the place for you. I'm your host, certified life coach and Catholic mom, Danielle Thienel. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, let's get started.
Hello to all my beautiful mom listeners out there. I'm so happy to be with you this week. I wonder, did you see the title of this week's episode? Finding Jesus in Your Hot Chocolate, and kind of get curious, where you're like, I wonder what that's going to be like. Well, I can't wait to share with you how the title came about. It's a very interesting story, and that's probably really what I'm just going to do is tell the story about it today. And then I will have this call to action that I haven't done before. And that will be a form to fill out should you want to participate in this kind of experiment that I'm doing. But before I jump into finding Jesus in your hot chocolate, I just wanted to say and tell you where my mama heart is right now. When this episode comes out, it will be the week of my youngest child's 16th birthday. That's right. I have two older ones that are in college, and I have one at home with me. And, can you guys relate when it's just your last and your baby? And I just can't believe that he is going to be independently driving soon. And I just wanted to let you know that that's kind of where I am in my motherhood right now, just kind of soaking in and relishing this time that I have. And my youngest is a son, so if anyone out there can relate, send me a message and we can commiserate a little bit on how at this age, right, it's not as cuddly and, hanging out and having deep conversations like it used to be. And as my clients already know, whenever we are on our calls together and their young ones come on, and maybe they're on their lap or just in the background, or even if moms are feeding their child right there when we're having our sessions, I'm always like, oh, soak that time up. It won't last forever. And, that's just where my heart is this week. And I wanted to share that with you all. Okay. So let's talk about finding Jesus in your hot chocolate. Like, where did that come from? Really, the theme about today is going to be hearing the voice of God. And as I have told before on my calls, maybe not yet on the podcast, when we've been talking about, feeling promptings from the Holy Spirit, or when I speak about the voice of God, or I ask my mamas and say, like, what would Jesus say to you right now as you're struggling? If he was right there beside you and you were talking, what would he say to you? I want to point out that no longer does God, come and have this voice from heaven that's truly just as we think about it, like from behind the burning bush, or, the big voice that says, this is my beloved son. Like, no longer do we have that happening, but God for sure is speaking to us all the time. And for me, I have had several instances in my life when I could hear him. Again, not like the actual voice, but it comes through your heart. It comes through a knowing, this deep sense of peace, or just in your mind, you actually hear the words. And this has happened to me a couple times, but the one time that really stood out to me was when I was having quiet contemplation prayer time, where I did readings and prayers, and then I had a journal and I would write. And that is when I was in my room, in my special place, and had a mug of hot chocolate next to me. And it was during this quiet time when I was really focused in my life to be still and know that I am God. And this was months after really focusing on making time for prayer and having like quality time where I not only was asking for things, but I was just making the deliberate effort to pause and listen, like actively listen. And I remember that, I mentioned about how my son was turning 16 this week, but I remember he was away at a hockey practice. And the only time my son played hockey was when he was young. So I'm talking like maybe, 4, 5, 6 at the most. And when I hear myself do the math, right? So this was about 10 years ago. But I remember it. I remember that I was by myself in the house, and again, they were away at hockey practice. And I remember pausing in my journaling and stopping and looking at my hot chocolate. And I heard God tell me, I love you so much. And it was more also, there was more that was around, I love that you spend this time with me. I love that you are making this effort. This is about the conversation and the feelings that I had when I heard him speaking to me. And at this moment, hence this is where the title came from, I looked down at this hot chocolate and there was a perfect heart staring right up at me. That is kind of, when you even go to like a coffee shop now and they can do those fancy things in the latte and make like a heart shape. That's kind of what it looked like. And I even snapped a picture of it. And I have that like as a record because I remember just knowing through the depths of my soul that this was God's voice. And the fact that I saw that heart and then knew that it was like the physical manifestation of the words that I was hearing from him. And yes, it was a time when I was able to grab the camera and take a picture because in that moment I had said, I cannot wait to tell my husband and the kids when they get home. I remember even meeting them at the door and being like, oh my gosh, you guys, you're not going to believe it. What happened to me? And then even getting to show them the picture. I'm sure by my enthusiasm and excitement, they really believed me. And I know that the impact to the kids was so great because as I was explaining and talking to them, I said, guys, this really does happen. God does talk to you. You when you get quiet and when you make the effort, you really can hear his voice. And I said that later that evening, I remember just thinking, I wonder how many more people out there have experiences like I do. And then I thought of all of the people who want to hear his voice, long to hear his voice, question if that's possible. And then always when you learn of somebody else going through something that perhaps you want as well, your mind always goes to the question, how? How can I make that be something that I get to experience as well? And so in that kind of rest of the evening contemplation time about what happened, and then me thinking about other people who have had these experiences, and then thinking of those, the opposite, those who don't think it's possible or long to know how to do it. This is when I said out loud to my family, I am going to write a book that has the title, Finding Jesus in My Hot Chocolate, because that is where I found him that day. That is how he manifested his voice to me and then solidified that knowing in me by hearing what he had to say and then seeing that visual that matched up. And I declared that day that I was going to write a book about it. Not so much the story or experience, but how I envisioned it is like the book Chicken Soup for the Soul. Do you all remember those books? At first, it was just literally one, Chicken Soup for the Soul, where it had individual people making testimonies that sent in to talk about their experiences that were positive and uplifting and just felt really good to read. And then they started making like Chicken Soup for the Parenting Soul, Chicken Soup for the Grandmother's Soul, and it would be themed. So the idea that I had about a book was based on something that same premise as Chicken Soup for the Soul, whereas I know that there are so many people out there, and hopefully including you listeners who are listening to this podcast, that if it's not you, then maybe you know of someone or have a friend or relative who they too have said, I have had that experience of hearing the voice of God or of Jesus or of the Holy Spirit. I just encompass the Trinity when I'm talking about hearing the voice. And so I wanted to create a space that would help share and celebrate these stories. Just as the Chicken Soup for the Soul had to have people like hand them in, I think I finally, after all these years, get started on the process or experiment to gather other people's testimonials where they have heard the voice of God. And I would like to gather them and compile them and organize them into a book that would be available to all of those other people who tug at my heart, who maybe feel like they haven't had that experience, or they want that experience and don't know how, or they don't believe that that takes place today in ordinary ways to ordinary people, that you can be able to hear the voice of God. And so I wanted to encourage my listeners who are seeking to hear the voice of God to remember that He does speak to all of us. And He might speak to us in different ways and in different timings, right? We might not always get the answers that we want or expect when we do reach out, but we can trust that He is always there and guiding us on our journey. And I know that it will be clear from the stories that others have besides my own, that it can be powerful and a transformative experience. A second time outside of the Finding Jesus in My Hot Chocolate time was one that I do talk about as my transition story to when I became finding out everything about coaching. And that was when I got sick. And after I recovered, I went back to the office and was booting up my computer. And in that moment, I for sure heard the Spirit speak to me and said, it's time for you to go home. I've told this story before, or you can find it under the About Me section on my website at danielletienel.com. And that I know was another time when it was this actual voice. Even though it came in my head and through my heart, I just knew that that was a message that was heaven sent. And, you know, this is a complex thing, and everybody's experience is a little nuanced, right? It's it's not something that might be clear, but what I know when I talk to other people, because I have talked to others that have given me, testimonials of times that they knew that God spoke to them. So I know it happens. And just like Chicken Soup for the Soul, I do want to make a space where I can collect those. So I thought I would use this episode to finally, I will tell you that my son does mention it every once in a while. Like, oh, how's that book coming, Mom? How's the Find Jesus in Your Hot Chocolate book? And right now I can tell you all that I actually do have not one, but 2 books that are in the works, and I will be able to offer to you very soon. But this is a separate project that I'm kind of in the book writing process now. So why not go ahead and just give a little start to this project? I'm not sure if it'll, take off like wildfire, or it's something that God's just prompting me to start now. And then maybe over the years, it'll come to fruition. But I am going to ask for you, if you yourself have been or had an experience where you knew that God spoke to you, and it doesn't have to be something that was, life transforming and life, changing, or, like something at a near death experience or at the lows of your lows. But it could be something like mine. I mean, it's not terribly profound that I was having a prayer session and just journaling afterwards and then saw a heart in my hot chocolate. But to me, it was everything. It was in that moment, without a doubt, this connection to heaven and my Lord that was so profound and special in that moment. And so if you would like to share with me and submit any testimonial that you have, or any friends or family that you could send this podcast to, I am going to have a link in the show notes of this podcast episode where it will then take you to a Google form. And in that form, you just answer a couple questions. You can just write down as best you can a little written blurb about what was going on with you and some of the details around where you were and how you heard his voice, and maybe what the before and kind of after, kind of what I've relied to you with my hot chocolate story. And so if you feel compelled, or if it sounds fun to you to share this, then you can go to that link and fill in the form, and you'll see there's just a few questions. And when you do that, you could be part of this book. But again, I don't know exactly what the end form will look like or the timeline of it, but I feel prompted. I feel pulled to just start right now and to use this platform of the podcast. So even what I want you to take away from this podcast, even if you don't submit your own testimony, I just maybe want you to just start contemplating, am I listening? Am I putting myself in a place of prayer and contemplation and quiet time and mindfulness and meditation, to where I'm not only just asking and saying prayers, but am I giving the moments where I am actually quiet enough and really activating my ears to listen to what God is saying to me? That is one of the takeaways that I would love for you to have from this episode. And maybe if the answer to that is no, I haven't, then maybe we're also in the Lenten season right now. Maybe that's something that you want to add, is to have some quiet, more listening, stillness time and say, can I hear you? Or even just ask that question, what do you want to say to me today, Lord? And see what comes of it. And that I do pray for all of you to have your own moment of finding Jesus in your hot chocolate. And then if you're compelled to share, then please fill in that link. I'm excited to hear what you have to say, and maybe there'll be enough to do a podcast episode where I can read some of your testimonies. I'm just thinking about that right now and how fun that might be. All right, everyone, that's what I have for you today. I hope you have a great week, and I will talk to you again next time.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Peaceful Mind Podcast. Are you ready to take everything I teach you here and put it to work for your own life? To really learn how to have peace of mind no matter what is happening around you? If so, I'd love to have you as a client. As your coach, this is where you'll get personal and focused time on your own mind using life coaching tools, concepts, and proven life-transforming wisdom, all through a faith-filled lens. To learn more about how we can work together, come on over to DanielleTienel.com. There, you'll see how to sign up for a free coaching consult and learn how to get started. Until next time, peace be with you always.